Hello, and welcome to Club Book with Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I'm Minneapolis-based author Annika Fajardo. You might have seen me before if you've been to Club Book. My debut adult novel, The Many Mothers of Dolores Moore, released recently, and you can actually find me tomorrow at Minneapolis Central Library giving a talk on magical realism at 6 p.m. on Thursday, October 2nd. Before I introduce tonight's guest properly, allow me a moment to tell you a little bit more about the unique series that is bringing her to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of St. Paul Public Library. Ramsey County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to the Bewitching and Silvia's other books will be available in the comment section of the live stream feed. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it to you personally to your door if you're close to the area. You can also find my new novel at Red Balloon as well. One final housekeeping note, in the comments, you'll see a survey link. MELSA would greatly appreciate hearing what you think of this Club Book program. It's quick and easy. Now, on to our main event. New York Times bestselling author Silvia Moreno-Garcia masterfully blends elements of horror, fantasy, noir, and historical fiction. Her distinctive style gained a wide audience with Mexican Gothic, winner of the Locus Award for Best Horror Novel in 2021, and one of Time's 100 Best Mystery and Thriller Books of all time. Moreno-Garcia's follow-ups include The Daughter of Doctor Moreau, a reimagining of the H.G. Wells classic set in the Yucatán, and The Seventh Veil of Salome, a dual timeline story that interweaves a biblical story of Salome with that of a Mexican actress playing her in a big budget Hollywood film. Moreno-Garcia's latest novel hit shelves in July. The Bewitching is a multi-generational saga about the primordial evil forces that have inspired witches in popular fiction. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly raves, with this equally spooky and sophisticated horror novel, best-selling author Moreno-Garcia proves she's as adept playing in the tropes of dark academia as any other of the subgenres she tried on. It's as unsettling as it is unputdownable, which is true. After a short talk by our guests and some initial questions from me, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. You can also send a message to Club Book through Facebook Messenger or email, where we're at clubbookmn@gmail.com. Now, let's welcome Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Hello, Silvia.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I am great. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's very great being here.
As I told you before we started, my daughter's name is Silvia, so I think you have a fabulous name, as well as being a fabulous author.
It used to be, when I was young, Sylvia was only a name for old ladies, but I
That's
think
what my daughter said.
Yeah, most popular in the last few years. So,
Yes, yes. I am so excited to talk to you about The Bewitching. This is a gorgeous novel. Both the cover is gorgeous and everything inside of it is gorgeous, albeit rather frightening. I was hoping that we could start by having you give us a setup for the novel, and I think you have a few other things to share with our audience.
Yes, I have a bit of a presentation. It should be about 20 minutes if everything goes right. I'm about to try to share my screen, and we'll see how this goes. The devil is Acrobat Adobe, and so
you're doing it. You're doing it.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, it's working so far. All right, screen sharing. So, yeah, the title of my presentation is "I Am a Pineapple." And we'll find out what I mean by that. So syncretism. I took this definition from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, which says the combination of different forms of belief or practice. One of the most useful examples of this that I have found in recent years has been the bao. So bao is a type of Chinese dish that you have very commonly with dim sum at any kind of restaurant. You can get it. I live right next to Chinatown in Vancouver, so I'm very familiar with different types of cuisine, regional cuisine, and the bao is something that I have tried. It looks pretty much like you see on the left side. And on the right side, you can see a picture of Chinatown, Mexico City, Mexico City's versions of the bao. It has two big differences. One, Mexico City baos are very colorful. Mexican culture in general has a lot of saturated colors in a lot of its art and its craft, and you can see that in the food items. And also the flavors go far beyond the bao that you would find in any Chinatown in other parts of North America. You have right there zarzamora con queso, which is cheese and a type of fruit. Guayaba, another type of fruit. Rompope, an alcoholic drink. Duvalin, which is like a candy that you find, and many other kinds of flavors. So I was very interested when I was in Mexico City a couple of years ago, and I was in Chinatown, and I saw this because it is a very easy example of syncretism, of two things coming together and forming something new. And I want to talk about syncretism because it's important for understanding my novel and understanding the history of witchcraft in Mexico, which is referenced in the book. Now, before the arrival of the Spanish colonizers onto Mexico, there were a wide variety of what we might call magical practitioners in pre-Hispanic Mexico. There were terms such as Nahual, which was a shape changer, Teyolocuani, a heart eater that appears in my novel, Tizitl, a fortune teller, Tepati, a healer, Tezihuitlaski, a hail conjurer, a wizard that specifically conjures hail, and so it'll destroy your crops. So it got pretty granular, as you can see by that, a specific wizard that just works on hail, a monster that eats monsters that eat hearts or that eat ankles is another type of witch. Another type of sorcerer, spellcrafter, supernatural creature. So we have all of these magical practitioners in pre-Hispanic Mexico, a wide variety, probably dozens of names and very specific specialties. But when the Spaniards meet the indigenous people of Mexico, they flatten all of these terms into a single word, which is brujo or bruja, and which we can translate in English into witch or warlock. And what happens through time is that Spanish beliefs and indigenous beliefs mix to produce a witch that has certain characteristics in Mexico. And part of these characteristics come from that indigenous belief system, that indigenous lore, but now they're going to be called brujo or bruja. And some of these characteristics are witches are entities that are evil. They damage or destroy a community. They suck blood. They fly through the air, and they can transform. Often they transform into balls of fire as they fly through the air, but they also can transform into animals. You see a lot of reference to turkeys, for example, which to me is kind of hilarious. I don't find turkeys terrifying in any kind of way, although they are quite big. My friend from Ukraine says that he was chased by an Ukrainian turkey one time, but anyway. Despite the fact that all of these wide net of spellcasters have been flattened post-conquest into a single word, witch, brujo or bruja, to this day, some regionalisms and persist. So in Tlaxcala, they have something called the Tlahuepuchi, and so they're still using the Nahua word that you would have used, and they specifically regionally identify this type of witch, and they would probably not say just witch in general, they would say Tlahuepuchi. However, most people are just going to say witch, brujo or bruja. However, what happened? Before the Spaniards arrived, as I said, there was a constellation of magic practitioners, and there were some magic practitioners which we wouldn't call necessarily, they wouldn't necessarily have those associations with blood drinking or with eating hard, or being malicious. They might have been, for a lack of a better term, good witches, or but the way that I see it is anti-witch. These kinds of practitioners are not called witch or brujo in Mexican culture. For example, the yerberos. They have functions that overlap with ideas about healing, perhaps spiritual advisors or shamanism, and they can do several things. They can undo bewitchings with a limpia or a cleansing. Very often you'll see this with an egg. An egg is rubbed against your body, and you take the bad stuff, you put it on the egg, then you break the egg. They can diagnose supernatural illnesses and ailments. So, I mean, the egg is kind of like the medicine, but they would first tell you more or less what's happening, what type of supernatural bewitchment you're under. And they might offer protection, talismans, things against the evil eye, that sort of thing. These magic practitioners would have existed before the Spanish conquest, like I said, with a wide variety of names. Now, I can't call them anything more than other witch in a way, because they are involved in the world of the supernatural. However, we don't call them brujo or bruja. And we also don't call brujo or bruja or brujeria the everyday folk magic that people practice, even though technically it is magic. You are casting a spell to try to obtain something. A very common example is if you want to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you take a picture of San Antonio de Padua, a saint, you spin it upside down, and you demand that it give you a boyfriend or girlfriend, and then he will do it. Or sometimes you make offerings to certain saints. You might give them flowers, but I've also seen that people give them cigarettes or alcohol, things like that, in order to curry favor. And this is because, as I said, syncretism, ways of worshiping and ways of understanding the magical world persisted even after the conquest and are kind of remembered immemorially. And so maybe you would have brought offerings to a certain minor god or goddess back in the day. Now you bring it to a saint, and you're hoping to get something out of it. However, this folk magic and traditions that you might find in the countryside, for example, to curry favor so that your crops don't go badly, you might do a certain, kind of small spell. Most people, they will tell you, no es brujeria, and I'm not a witch. This is not considered, again, exists in kind of like another space where we can separate it from the brujo, bruja, the witch, and then these other sorts of practices that exist side by side, parallel with it. And nowadays things change, obviously. There's been a big influence of neo-paganism and pop culture in Mexican culture in the last few years, especially from the United States, influencing us. The picture on the right is El Pasaje Esotérico, the esoteric passage in Plaza Galerías near downtown Mexico City. And you can see it's a mix of everything. There's a pyramid and some horses and some angels and things like that. You can go there, you can have your fortune told, people will read your aura. There's Western astrology mixed also with some things that we might consider more traditional folk remedies, and that we can honestly would have called it a couple of centuries ago, witchcraft. But now it's very kind of pop culture influence, and even in the Mercado de Sonora, which used to be the witch market in Mexico City, a lot of the ingredients and remedies that you see nowadays are different from what it would have been a few decades ago, made in China, written at the bottom of a soap, that kind of thing, instead of just buying the wing of an eagle, things like that. You buy other things, but there's still this idea of practicing some kind of magic. And also there's new practices that have emerged that kind of run parallel with this folk magic, with these ideas about the supernatural, and that's practices such as the Santa Muerte. It emerges in the 1990s. It's a new kind of worship system. It overlaps with some elements of folk magic too. So that's Mexico, very syncretic system, like I said, mixes a lot of things, and you get the brujo or bruja, the witch, that is going to be part of Mexican popular culture. What are the differences between American witches versus Mexican witches? Well, American witches have broomsticks and potions, which give them the ability to fly on their own, sometimes to change shape. Mexican witches, they just do it on their own. They don't need to ride a broomstick to fly through the air. American witches, they don't drink blood. You don't see that very often. There is a deep association with the devil in Puritan thought that does not exist in Mexico. Often, oddly enough, people don't kind of connect the devil to a witch. Even in the times of the Inquisition, it's odd how you can often kind of, like, the Inquisitor is going and arresting people who are Jewish, but is not really very worried about the folk magic practitioners and all the people doing this kind of stuff in the area as much. So that association is really not there. And American witches, there's often talk about witch marks, moles, skin tags, physical things that reveal that a person is a witch, the long hook nose that we find in the stereotype of the witch. Mexico, no such thing. Anybody can be a witch. And in fact, a lot of the stories that you hear in folk tales, the big element of discovery at the end is your uncle, your aunt, your sister, your daughter, your wife, whatever, was the witch that was bedeviling the village. So no such thing as, oh, I saw her the first time I knew she was a witch kind of situation going on in Mexican thought. Americans and Europeans also have this figure of the anti-witch, or the person that you go to when you're in magic trouble. They call it the cunning folk. I really like the term. Cunning folk, also known as folk healers or wise folk, were practitioners of folk medicine, helpful folk magic and divination in Europe from the Middle Ages until the 20th century. Their practices were known as the cunning craft, and their services included threatened witchcraft. Although some cunning folk were denounced as witches themselves, they made up a minority of those accused, and the common people generally made a distinction between the two. So you see here that in Europe too, there's a distinction between this type of magic practitioner and a witch or a warlock. There's something called apotropic marks, which appear in my novel, and those are basically marks to ward off evil. You can see one on the right. It's concentric circles are very common, kind of like labyrinths to trap spirits. Sometimes you put things in the walls, like a shoe or the bones of a cat, the bones of a horse, and that keeps your house safe. So you see these marks above windows, next to doors. This is a European kind of way of dealing with witches, keeping them away. But it doesn't mean that Mexicans don't have kind of systems to ward off witches. You hear things like putting some scissors under the bed of a baby or a child. Sometimes some people say above it, hanging like a mobile. I don't know how much I would kind of do that, but those are supposed to keep witches away so they don't drink the blood of your baby and it dies. So as you can see, there are differences between these belief systems, between the Mexican witch belief system and what you find in the United States in Salem, say 1600 and something. But there are also certain commonalities, and that is what I decided to do in this book, was to meld these two worlds together, because I saw points where these two cultures were speaking to each other, and I figured, well, syncretism is really fun. So we go back to the Hawaiian pizza analogy. So the Hawaiian pizza, whether you love it or not, is a Canadian invention. It was not invented in Hawaii. It was actually invented by an immigrant. I believe it was a Greek immigrant, and he was inspired by Chinese restaurants near the area where he lived. And of course, ham and pineapple are not native to Hawaii. So the Hawaiian pizza is a really great example of syncretism and things coming together to make something new. And I think my novel is syncretic, but I also think I'm a syncretic writer. I am a writer who grew up in the border zone in the north of Mexico, very close to the United States, who speaks English, writes in English, about a lot about Mexico, who grew up in Mexico, who didn't move to Canada until she was an adult. So I think I am, in the end, a bit of a syncretic creature. And so it wouldn't be surprising that I like to write things that are syncretic and that combine several things at once to make something new. So that's it for me. And I will attempt to stop sharing my screen. And if
That is fascinating.
You can stop me. All right, stop sharing. There you go.
That is so fascinating. And I love the idea of the Hawaiian pizza, which I did not know it was invented in Canada, but that makes sense because you always have Canadian bacon on it, whatever that is. Exactly. I don't know.
I mean, it's either an item of pride or of horror to people, but yeah, it's from Ontario. That's where we first find Hawaiian.
Yeah, on the
1990s.
border.
Mhm.
Yeah. It was really this is such a good introduction to your book, and I almost wish I knew all this stuff before I read the book. I'm excited for people who haven't read the book yet but are getting this background, because it will give them this extra kind of layer of understanding of all of the pieces of the witchcraft and the and some of the things that happen in all the timelines of the book. Do you want to just give us just like a really basic like overview of the book for people who haven't read it?
Yeah, it takes place across three timelines: 1998, 1934, 1908, and we see three different women who suddenly start to believe that witches and witchcraft are real.
Yeah. So yeah, the novel is told in these three time periods, and one of the things I was noticing while I was reading, this is my first real horror novel. And there is a moment in the book when the uptight matriarch, Carolyn Yates, kind of disregards horror as a genre. And there was something that she said that I thought, oh, I hate to say this, but I kind of agree with her, because I have always been too afraid to read anything scary or watch scary movies or have anything scary. I get nightmares from almost everything, and I love the way that I learn about horror, the genre of horror, through the characters in this book. And so, can you help me understand, from someone who gets scared easily, what is it that draws you to this genre?
Yeah, well, I should say that often people think that the defining factor of horror is, am I scared or not? And they will dismiss a book or a movie as, oh, it wasn't scary, therefore it wasn't horror, which is kind of unfair, because we don't say that about if you didn't laugh a lot in a romantic comedy, you don't say, oh, it wasn't a romantic comedy. You just say, well,
Right.
maybe, I didn't like it, or I didn't connect with the jokes, they didn't land very well, but you don't say that. But we often do say it wasn't scary, so it wasn't horror kind of situation. And it's a very wide spectrum of different things that we end up putting in this category called horror. So horror is, I always think that genres are defined by, kind of both the history of them, what happened before, what's happening now, and kind of like the books that sit next to it on the shelf. They help you categorize and define what is this thing that I'm looking at, and that's how I define horror, rather than saying is it scary or not. So that's one thing. The other thing is that all genres in general, I think, are simply different tools to tell a narrative. And just like you can take a photograph right now with your cell phone of this sky at night, or you can paint Starry Night like Van Gogh, and you wouldn't say, well, Van Gogh was a dummy, that doesn't look realistic. stars don't look like that. They don't look like that when you look up at the sky. But Van Gogh is painting in his style, showing you what he sees in a certain way. And it's the same thing for all kinds of genres. And it becomes the same thing for horror. It is a way to paint the world, or to approach the world in ways that are not necessarily the same lens of hyperrealism that you might use in other kinds of narratives. So you can tell a story, a very dramatic story about a first-time mother, young mother married, who has just moved somewhere with her husband and is very nervous because she's pregnant with her first child. And you can do that in a dramatic way, very realistic, or you can have Rosemary's Baby, in which a young woman and mother fears that she is pregnant with the devil's spawn, that something supernatural is happening. And I think you can get a deeper feeling of dread, or a very interesting feeling of dread with Rosemary's Baby that you may not get with the completely realistic story. Sometimes the horror in a novel or in a book expresses things more accurately than if you have everything in the realm of realism. And so it can be very useful to tell certain kinds of stories. And that's what I find interesting in horror.
And do you scare yourself?
With horror narratives? No.
Yeah, with writing your own?
No, I've watched horror movies and read lots of horror, so there's very little that will scare me. I know the narratives and the mechanics of a lot of these films and novels. So generally I am not scared, but that doesn't mean it's not working. Like I say, it's not effective. I still can
Yeah.
a lot of things by it, but I'm not the kind of person who is going to be, after I watch it, I'm not going to be afraid to go to sleep for fear that vampires are going to come through the window or anything like that. It's not like, well, it's over, it was great, a few shivers, a few things, oh my God, I thought she wasn't going to get out of the house, and then it's like, okay, now what are we going to have for dinner after? It's all good.
Then you're fine. I had to keep reminding because I did find it scary, especially towards the end, and I had to keep reminding myself. I'd kind of look at it like analytically and say, oh, look at what Sylvia's doing here. And look at how she's trying to make me scared. And I had to think, oh my God, and it's working. Oh, it's working. But I was trying to step back, just knowing that I was going to need to ask the questions. One of the things I loved there was that there's a passage on, I think it's on page 74 about evil, and this question about when and where evil begins, that I was really struck by. And you're definitely exploring that, like you just said, you can explore something, realistically, or you can really amp up the stakes by turning it into Rosemary's Baby, which I had to stop watching one time I saw it. What are you trying to explore with looking at these themes through the macabre? What are you trying to get at that way?
Well, The Bewitching is really about women's stories in general, and women speaking, I would say, in a large conceptual manner. I don't like to go too much into what I mean about things because I like people to discover their own meanings, but in general, I see it as, women talking.
Mm-hmm. Does the plot come first for you, or sort of the theme of what you want to explore come first?
Some books of mine have been very much explorations about a specific thing that I wanted to achieve or study or understand a little bit better. And that's how they initiated Gods of Jade and Shadow. I really was interested in looking at the hero's journey. So that was me kind of going in and figuring out how can I use that structure to tell something. And it was very much more analytical pursuit, as opposed to something more emotive, where I just have an image that emerges, and those are, I have had definitely short stories emerge like that. It's a single image, almost fully formed, and you build the thing around it because they're so short. You can do that. Novels need a little bit more structure, but even then, there are plenty of novels that emerge just because there's some imagery in there that I'm fascinated by, and I come back to it and come back to it, and I try to make sense of it, and then something. I'll build a scaffold for it to that way. Yeah.
I really like the way that this book is told through these three different voices and these three different time periods. And what I started out thinking was the modern version, the modern story, which actually is 1998. And I also recognize all of those pieces of it, but also historical, I guess. And then there is the horror author that the main character Minerva is researching, and her voice from 1934 is written in first person, and I found myself really drawn to her voice, and then I realized, oh, she's the writer. Maybe that's why I'm so drawn to her voice. And then the third one is the story of Alba that takes place in Mexico in 1908. Is that right? That is this just lush kind of cinematic, really dramatic storyline. So how did you write each voice? Did you take one at a time? Did you write back and forth as you were going through?
I write in chronological order, so every chapter that you go, if I often go 1908, and then I'm moving, 1934, then I'm going 1998. I'm doing that as I write it, so I don't write the sections in a chunk and then move to the other chunk. They're done like that. Yeah,
you're writing it the way that we read it.
Yeah, I'm writing it the way you read it. I'm switching voices as I go along.
Yeah. What was it about Betty's voice that became first person?
Well, as you said, she's a writer, and I was playing with Shirley Jackson's kind of style a little bit. I wanted to do something that was inspired by Shirley Jackson without it being Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson was an amateur witch, by the way, or she called herself that. And she has this specific way of telling a story that I quite enjoyed. And so I wanted to go and toy with that, and that became first person, partially for that reason. And also I thought it would help break apart the other two sections and differentiate them from each other.
Minerva, that she's the character that takes place in 1998. She's at a college. She's a grad student, and she and her fellow grad student friend discuss the idea of the collective unconscious. And I was really drawn to that, and I think writers in general are drawn to that idea. And both you and your characters draw these parallels, as you said in your presentation too, between Mexican folklore, which is a New England witches, and the folklore around those things. Why do you think those stories overlap like that? Why do you think that there's these similar things? I mean, you pointed out the differences between them in your presentation, but it seems like I feel like the collective unconscious and these witch stories from such different cultures have something to do with each other.
Yeah, I mean, magic as a sorcery and protection from sorcery is a very common idea across cultures and across times. You find it in Assyria, you find it in Europe in the Middle Ages, you find it in different kinds of more organized ways in England and Golden Dawn and those kinds of secret societies in more modern times. It's something that we are drawn to, I think, as a way to explain the natural world and try to make some kind of sense of it in a certain way. But there's also the very real issue of colonialism and of how knowledge and beliefs travel from one space to the other just as people travel. So people bring in certain kinds of thoughts that could become embedded with a local culture. You see it sometimes very clearly in the Caribbean, where you have enslaved people who were brought over and how they mixed with some European thought systems, um, and it's very clear that some voodoo practices emerge, for example, from African magical practice, and then are modified and then further modified by pop culture to be understood in a completely different way that a local practitioner would understand voodoo. So there's that. There's a kind of like a transnational magic systems being shared between people across time, and that's one reason, colonialism. And yeah, the other reason nowadays in modern time periods, we're all very much more interconnected than we were just a couple of decades ago. And I had never heard the term vampire witches applied to Mexican witches until a few years ago, when I started seeing it online in Mexican spaces being used. And I think the figure of the vampire is becoming more kind of entwined with the traditional folk figure of the witch.
Well, every time I go to visit my family in Colombia, my daughter comes back with somebody has given her an evil eye bracelet. And you mentioned that in your acknowledgments that you will be found with an evil eye bracelet. Do you practice other, let us say, like superstitions?
No, not really. My mother is the one who kind of has those, and my grandmother, my great grandmother, kind of going back. I don't normally do that, but I know them. Like I know all the stuff that you're supposed to do, or you're not supposed to do. Most of the charms, I'm wearing one right now, I'm looking at it. Most of the charms against the evil eye and things like that are things that my mother gives me, and I tuck them somewhere and I put them somewhere. I never get rid of them because they're gifts, but I don't necessarily kind of believe in them. But I have a kind of different kind of charm here. This is from Japan, a temple, and these are anime characters. But I think this one is for money. And yeah, so when we went to Japan, one of my kids bought me that, and that's an example of syncretism right there. And so I keep it here by my desk, but it doesn't mean that I would be like, oh, that's the thing that keeps this house going. If I don't give blood this week, we're gonna be in trouble.
So speaking of travel, you give us these two beautiful settings in this book, the New England college, old school kind of East Coast kind of college setting, and then we've got the farm and the little village in Mexico, and you can just like feel all of those. You can just feel those locations, and then the contrast between them as we go back and forth in time. Did you travel to these places, or did you rely on memory? How did these two settings come about?
I lived in Massachusetts for 3 years. I was a college student on a scholarship, and I was actually a resident assistant on campus in an East Coast school. That was the inspiration for the college in this novel. So I knew that setting intimately, and I used that for 1998. For 1908, I was relying on oral history and the memories of my family about a certain time and place. So it's set in Hidalgo, and that's where part of my family comes from. Yeah.
It's so vivid. Like I could just hear those horses going across. I could just like picture like the dust, and I don't know, maybe that's where my brain was going as I was reading. So you definitely capture the angst of the PhD student, and the way that that Minerva in this 1998 setting is struggling over the summer to do this work. Is this from personal experience?
Well, I haven't done a PhD, but I did do a master's degree. No, I was never that anxious. When I did my master's, I went back as an adult. I was the oldest person in my class. I was in my 30s. But my younger classmates, who were a decade younger than me or more, they were very anxious. And there was this feeling at a certain time of a semester when you would encounter somebody in the hallways and they would be just like, can't talk, gotta, I got the notes for my thesis. I just, gotta finish the citations. I won't, it's like fine, that kind of stuff. So there is this kind of feeling that it's sort of the end of the world if you don't get it right. And when I was doing my bachelor's, I was a scholarship student. I wasn't two scholarships, and I was working several jobs on campus. So there was a lot of stress, and I was one of the only visible minorities. So I did feel a lot of pressure in that sense. But I think nowadays, academia, it's just I can understand why people feel like it's the end of the world if I don't get this, postdoc kind of thing. There's so few positions, and it's just such a little bit of a difficult environment. But yeah, I had a stressful time in a way, in the sense that if I had to get good grades, or I wouldn't be able to be there. I couldn't afford it on my own. So that was just, but it was very fun too. At the same time, I tend to be, I don't know, fairly cool in certain situations. So it was like, well, yeah, it's like, I'm not sleeping for 2 days, but life is good anyway. Have a $1 cheeseburger. Back then there was a $1 menu.
The dollar menu, yes. As Minerva is researching the horror writer, the matriarch Carolyn suggests that researching a deceased minor author might not be that interesting. If there was a PhD student in the future who was researching Silvia Moreno-Garcia, what would they find? Would there be notebooks left behind? How would you feel about being researched in the future?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I've told people to just lie about me, to say nothing true about me if everybody comes to ask for any biographical information, to fudge all the details, and so that nobody can get an accurate picture of me. So I am like that. I don't like to make it easy for people.
You're not storing your journals and in the archival boxes for the future?
I periodically burn and destroy notes and like that. I just get rid of them. I just shred them. I just shred something recently, and I'm sorry, everybody. Those were all the notes for Gods of Jade and Shadow. They're gone. I do have an archive at Texas A&M where I send some things, but to be honest, most of everything ends up being destroyed in one way or another. One of my kids.
So you're curating.
I am curating it, and I don't care to keep it. I think it ceases to have a certain usefulness after a point, because the object has been created. The final object exists as it is, and that's what I want people to look at, not necessarily my rough drafts or things like that. I do send some stuff to the archive, but I'm not very drawn to preserving everything forever, and we'll see what the X will be. Probably not a lot. Like I say, I'm going to leave a lot of loose ends for people.
Well, that'll make it all the more exciting for the future PhD students. So I feel like you're not going to give me the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because when Minerva is researching the novelist, she says there's probably a hidden message in the work of all writers. So what is the hidden message in The Bewitching?
No, I cannot tell you that. That would be cheating. And I will say that I think when time passes sometimes and you go back to a book, the answers to certain questions in the book change as you change. So that's what I find exciting sometimes about literature, that you can go back and look at it again, and you thought you had the answer, and then you gaze at it 20 years from the first time you saw it, and you realize I didn't have the answer. Maybe this is a better answer, or was there the true answer? That's what I find fun.
Yeah. And it's true. That's why it's so fun to go back and read books, because you get something different out of them every time. do you get something different out of your own books when people ask you questions about them?
Well, the questions, there's a lot of overlapping questions quite often, and a lot of time I know a lot of them. So when somebody asks me something that I didn't think about, I'm usually like, oh, cool.
So speaking of reader questions, we have a few coming in. If you are watching and would like to ask Silvia a question, you can leave a question in the Facebook and various other channels they'll be routed to us. One question from the audience says, I'm curious how your books are received by American and Mexican audiences. Are there significant differences or anything that surprises you?
I'm not sure about Mexican audiences because I'm not there on the ground, so it's very hard for me to say. And American audiences, it varies. I get a lot of good reviews in like newspapers and journals and things like that. Lots of very nice positive reviews, and the publicist shares them with me. Oh, look, Kirkus says, lovely, a star. And I'm like, that's amazing. And then you go into these other spaces like Goodreads or things like that, and people, they savage you, they go like, and she has bad hair too, and you're like, oh my God. So I tried not to go into those spaces for that reason precisely, because although it is good when you go and you read something that you consider a beautiful classic of literature, like, The Age of Innocence is one of my favorite novels of all time, and you're like, oh, that's a perfect novel. It is a perfect novel, believe me, everybody. And you go and you see the reviews, and they're like, what a piece of shit. And you're like, you know what? They don't like The Age of Innocence. I feel a lot better about myself because, clearly they have no taste.
That is a great to hear. Yes. Speaking of American and Mexican audiences, a reader wants to know if you write in English and in Spanish. I think you just said you write in English. And they're curious if you have any role in the translation of your work.
Yes, I oversee the translation of my novels, and I have it in my contract that the translator needs to be familiar with Mexican Spanish, because Spanish is very varied and very different across all of America and Spain too.
So do you come up with some of it in Spanish as you're writing in English, or does it go straight to English?
Oh, I write it in English, but my notes are mixed. Some of my notes are in Spanish, and then another part is in English. That's very much fluid as I'm working through it. But once I'm sitting down and working on it, it's just like it's English. So.
Because I assume you're doing research in Spanish, for example.
Yeah.
So you're bringing in all
and sometimes I'm just figuring out ways to speak things in English that are not easily spoken. Especially had that problem with the slang of Velvet Was the Night, where I had to kind of come up with my own ways of saying things because there was no easy way to say it in English for a lot of those very specific slurs, for example.
I'm navigating all of the differences. And depends on what kind of Spanish the copy editor speaks, for example. What I think is right or not.
And for example, for Velvet Was the Night, then when we were doing the translation, I inserted back all the local lingo that I would, that I had, come up with, like English ways of saying that. I went back and I said, oh, well, now we can say carajo, we can say pendejo, we can say verga, we can say all these things because that's what I would have said it, but that's what they're saying. Basically, they're speaking in Spanish, but you're hearing it in English kind of situation. And so that was fun, kind of like, oh, look, they took my pendejo, now I get to put it back in.
So we have a question from the audience about the beautiful cover. Do you as the author have any say in the cover art or on any of your other books?
Yes, I do. Again, it's in my contract. I have say in the cover, and I often work with the art director in my kind of like other life before being a full-time writer. I've only been a full-time writer for past 2.5, 3 years, all my other books I was working at a different job. I have served as art director for things, so I know stuff.
So do you have a background in visual arts?
Communications, that's what I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And so communications, that overlaps into art direction. I'm just
at some point, because I was running the magazine of the Faculty of Science at the University of British Columbia, and some of the stuff that I did before that too involved printing and newsletters and things like that. So I had to overview the printing presses, and yeah, before things went all digital. So I would look at the blue lines back then and make sure that all the colors were good, all that kind of stuff. It was fun. I love tangible organic media. I kind of miss that. Magazines were so beautiful to put together, just using paperweights and looking at the photographs like that, the lens. Yeah.
Did you have a vision of the cover for this book or your other books before they began?
Yeah, I put together my ideas before I start talking to the art director, and I normally don't just tell them this is the one idea I have. Like I have 2 or 3 ideas of things where I might want to go. What do you think? And then they hit me back. Well, this is what I see, or yeah, I like this idea, but let's do this other thing. And so one of the initial drawings that came back from the artist when we were talking to the artist and with the art director, there were actually 3 hands in the first one. They were kind of like wrapped against each other, became one hand, things like that, but that we talked about. Yeah.
Well, it's very stunning, and people should get the book so that they can look at it in real life. Another audience question, you mentioned Shirley Jackson. Are there other female horror authors that you find inspiring or would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, modern live ones or ones who are gone. Mariana Enriquez is alive and well and kicking, and she has a new book just out this month. It's about cemeteries. It's not fiction, it's nonfiction. She likes to visit cemeteries. So Mariana Enriquez, who likes cemeteries, you might like her latest book. And she's also a fiction writer, but she does both. And then Amparo Dávila, who was a Mexican writer, she's dead. But she had her most famous story is called The House Guest. And there's a collection called The House Guest and Other Stories. So those are two of them.
Great. Somebody else is asking, now that you are working full-time as a writer, how many book projects are you working on at once?
Well, at once I only do one thing. I have to finish the thing I'm working on, and then I go to the next. But in terms of in a year, how much I'm doing in an average year, I do a novel a year is what I try to do, and a couple of short stories, 1 or 2 short stories. That's more or less what I think that I can do. And next year might be different because I might be doing something that is a little bit not a novel.
And when you say that you're writing full time, does that literally mean 8 hours a day sitting at a desk?
Oh God, no. Who can write 8 hours a day sitting at the desk? No, I mean, there's also parts to being a freelancer, which is what being a writer is, and it's everything from I just finished my taxes with my accountant a little while ago, so just getting all the receipts in order, that kind of stuff, and then there's other stuff like promoting the book. So doing events like this, preparing for events like this, and research, which takes up a lot of time, but you're not actually writing. You might be writing notes, but you're not writing the actual book and reading and finding bits and bobs. And then comes the actual writing, and there's a rewriting and the proofing and all these other kinds of things where you might not be sitting down and writing, but it's something involved in the creation of a book or a story or that kind of stuff. So I don't spend 8 hours chained to my desk. No, that would be. I know some writers who are strict with their schedules. I think Stephen King is pretty strict, and I've heard that Isabel Allende begins a new novel January
1st. Yeah.
There you go. She does. I don't. I'm like, yeah. I do have like a certain amount of time buffer where I'm like, well, gotta earn some money like any other freelancer, right? Gotta figure out how we're gonna pay for food.
Speaking of the various things that a writer does, there's a question about the research process. And how do you do that?
Uh, so hard to explain, but I'll just say that I often spend 4 to 6 months doing research only, and I rely a lot on interlibrary loans.
Yay for libraries.
Yes, for library loans.
Do you obtain books? Can you obtain books? You can obtain books from Mexico on interlibrary loan, can you?
No, I cannot, but I used through the University of British Columbia, I used to be able to get a lot of things sent from UC Riverside in California, which has a huge Chicano and Mexican collection. So that was, now it's a little bit harder because I'm not working there. So it's I have to rely on some other tricks and favors for people.
Yeah, it's nice to be connected to a university so you can get access to all of the university library tools that they have. I'm a former librarian myself, so yay for libraries. Do you have any favorite Gothic novels or tropes?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, mad woman in the attic. Yeah, I always like when somebody's going mad and they don't know if they're going mad. That's a good one. But White Sargassothy, I think, is a great kind of re-envisioning of Jane Eyre, which is a classic Gothic novel. And that's one of my favorite books.
Can you recommend anything for someone like me who gets too scared? Is there something that's like an intro to horror or Gothic? It's not too scary.
Or a lot of the old classics are not really scary, like Dracula. In fact, when I've told people read Dracula, they often complain to me it's just like people writing notes to each other. What the heck? Kind of situation. And it is. It's a story told in journals and back and forth letters. But that's why I like Dracula. There's something really fun about it. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is pretty short. I'm talking about it with the University of Toronto on Friday, and it's pretty short and sweet. It's a classic of fantastic fiction and horror and all this kind of stuff. But you read it and you're not like, what's the big deal, Dr. Jekyll? You're probably having gay sex when you transform, but
Okay, I'll put those on my list.
yeah.
And speaking of book recommendations, there was an earlier question. What books do you recommend to folks who have read your backlist? Or for those who have not, where would you start? And for somebody who's looking for their next creepy read for Halloween, what's your most creepy book of yours?
What's my creepiest book? Well, some people say Mexican Gothic is kind of gross. I don't know if it's creepy, but some people think it's gross. Yeah, I mean, sure, why not try Mexican Gothic? Other people, the Buffalo Hunter, it's pretty good. Stephen Graham Jones. It's a native, indigenous writer, but it has to deal with colonialism and buffalo hunters, and so it's kind of like a Western mixed with a horror story. I think it's pretty fun. There's also a lot of good horror comedies if you need that escape valve, both on TV and literature. Gary Hendrick, I don't know, never know how to say his name, but he did Horror Store, which is basically like an IKEA haunted store. So if you worked at an IKEA, but it was haunted. He's got a few of those, and so those are good because you can be like, oh my god, this is so creepy, but then there'll be something funny there, and you'll laugh about it.
I'm just being told Stephen Graham Jones is a recent past club book guest, and his talk is available on the podcast feed.
See, so if you didn't read it, you're a really bad person. No, I'm kidding.
And I have one final question before we finish up here. Because Minerva asks, what if witches do exist? And so I want to ask you, Silvia, do you believe in witches?
Well, not in the kind of a spooky sort of witch, but I mean, folk magic and witchcraft practices are something that has been done for centuries and that people still continue to do. So you do meet witches in everyday life. You just probably don't realize that they are practitioners of certain kind of magic. Now, if you're talking about like evil witches that drink people's blood and all that stuff, not really, but also that's why I have my mother putting talismans all around the house, so she makes sure that things go well around here.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case. She's in charge of, she's like,
Good. You're
really-
lucky.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Silvia. That's all we have time for this evening. And thanks for coming to talk to us about your beautiful book. This has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series of MELSA made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Ramsey County Library for the part they played in bringing Silvia to us. Before you log off, look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of our video momentarily. Last, consider joining Club Book on Monday, October 6th for their next program, this one in person and featuring chart-topping novelist John Hickey. John will appear at Prior Lake Public Library, part of the Scott County Library. Attendance at this in-person program is free, but seating is on a first-come, first-served basis. Visit clubbook.org for more details on this and other upcoming fall events. Thank you.
Thank you.